Hello, and welcome to another Teach Tuesday video, the next in our series of buzzwords. Today's buzzword is Open Educational Resources, or OER. So what is an OER? Well, first, it's open, which means that it has an open license, which you can think of as sort of the opposite of copyright. All right? It's the opposite of copyright in that there's no royalty associated with it. It doesn't expire in the way that a copyright does, and it's not exclusive, meaning that it's open to everyone. An example of an open license would be Creative Commons, which we'll talk about again in a second. Resources, of course, are assets, and what makes them educational is that they are for teaching. So assets for teaching that follow an open license. Doesn't have to be Creative Commons, but many of them are. Okay? So what counts as an asset? Well, I'll give you some examples. One is lectures, written lectures or other written materials, like journals, that sort of thing. Video or other media like images that are free to use. Question banks or full quizzes, activities for students, or sample discussion questions. The complexity of these for teaching range from full textbooks to short video lectures that you can incorporate into your instruction. Open educational resources follow what are called the 5 R's. So the first R is that if you write an open educational resource, you retain ownership of it. So you are the author. As the author, when you establish that you want to use an open license, you establish that you are going to freely give this to other instructors to reuse that material. In reusing that material, and you know this is true if you've used any sort of teaching assets that you didn't produce yourself, these instructors probably will want to revise that material. It's our third R. So if you've written a lecture, an instructor might not teach this particular section, but want to really emphasize this section. It might change your wording a little bit. They might incorporate a short video lecture explaining a complex topic, and they might add in some quiz questions or discussion questions. Taking revision to the sort of extreme would be to remix this material. So if I take a bit of lecture from this open resource, I take a video lecture from this open resource, add an image of my own, maybe an illustration of the topic, some of my own materials, some materials from another open resource. I am remixing. Revise and remix. And once those instructors have revised and remixed those materials, they, of course, then, since this is all following from an open license, have the right and some would say duty to redistribute our fifth and final R. Redistribute those materials to other instructors who can then reuse it, revise it, remix it, redistribute it, and so on. I mentioned Creative Commons. That's an example of one type of open license. And you'll often see that something is listed as Creative Commons with a little picture of a person, and then a little circle with a share alike. And this license is referred to as the CC by SA, or Creative Commons, alternative to copyright, by attribute the authors, and share alike, which means that when you share this, you should use the same license that's on it. Okay. So what are some of the considerations then in adopting an OER? Well, to begin with, I would suggest or encourage you to think of an OER much as you think of your textbook, as a bridge between the origins of the topics, so primary source materials, journal articles, that sort of thing, to your instruction or what you want the students to get out of those materials. This is something that a traditional textbook does. It's also something that an OER sets out to do. Okay? Some other considerations to think about, though, are, for example, cost, engagement, the degree to which students are willing to engage with this type of medium, which brings me to format. Written format versus reading on a digital device. Okay. One of the downfalls is that most people are not quite as comfortable reading from a digital device as on paper. They like marginalia, that sort of thing. The trade-off there is that the digital version is searchable. So if you're looking for a particular topic as the instructor and you want to assign a certain chunk from an OER, or if you're a student preparing for a test and you know you're weak in a particular area, you can go and find the relevant materials. Okay? Sort of the biggest concern we hear from instructors is whether or not this material can be considered peer-reviewed in a way similar to a traditional print publication, like a textbook. Some make the argument that this process is much the same as peer review, in part because these instructors have a vested interest in the materials. Also, since it's open and you can revise and remix it, if there's a particular area that you disagree with or you think should be adjusted, you're free to make those adjustments as the instructor. All right? And then tied to that is, of course, whether or not these should be considered quality resources. And along with that is the time commitment required to investigate these open educational resources on your own. We do have some instructors who have done this investigation and adopted open educational resources in their courses. And Nathan Krafchek from our center was kind enough to conduct some short interviews with them, so you don't have to take my word for it, and you can hear from them how it went.
Sure. So I've been interested in general in using more open resources, and I've experimented before in upper level classes where I have more familiarity with the text, and there's a lot of things that are out of copyright for me because I teach a lot of old text. But I was teaching a big gen ed class this semester, American government, which is 120 people. And so I was thinking like, okay, this is an opportunity to actually mess around with open source stuff that will reach more students and familiarize more students and also give me a good feedback. So I decided, I meant for a while I was gonna do American government kind of from a primary text approach. So I was gonna put together resources of like the Constitution and Federalist Papers and things like that, and then go from there. And I started working on that, and then I realized I probably needed kind of an in-between step. So I decided to use the OpenStax textbook basically as a bridge to figure out like what I need from a textbook and what I can eventually add myself. And I think I was also motivated by, I'm really frustrated by the American government textbooks. There's like 80 of them. They're all not as expensive as science books, but like $80. And they're all basically the same content in different order. And so it didn't necessarily seem like I would be missing much by switching.
I would just say that like my motivation for picking an OER in general was to reduce course costs. So I've been teaching here in Manitowoc for 14 years, and I know from experience that my students do not have very much money, and textbooks costs just keep going up. So I was looking for a way to bring the textbook cost down. and the OER was a great choice because it's free online, and then it's only $65 for my book if they buy the hard copy from the bookstore. You know, $300 down to 65 is huge for students.
Sure.
And then they use it for a full year because most students need 2 semesters of general chemistry. So they buy the book once and they have it for a whole year of study.
So there's two basic sources for me looking into OERs. One is the cost of student textbooks, and I think that's sort of a common reason. I mean, for chemistry textbooks, like most textbooks, they're running $100, $200 for the hard copies. And for general chemistry and organic chemistry, the information doesn't really change between textbooks. The only difference sometimes is how the material is arranged. So whether you get the material in a textbook that is 20 years old and costs $5, or it's current and it costs $200, it's really pretty much the same information. So an online resource like an OER textbook like OpenStax, it's all the same information. It's being curated in the same kind of ways, and it's free and available. The other is that my spouse, Amy, also we started sort of talking about this at the same time, and I think she predated me by a year using OER, so she was sort of on the forefront of that, and she had a lot of positive things to say. So once she had sort of taken the jump into the deep end with those, I decided that it would be okay for me to do the same thing.
I chose OpenStax because it was the first one that I was made aware of that seemed really easy to use as compared to some of the other ones I was made aware of, like LibreText and other versions. OpenStax was or is endorsed by Rice University and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, so I felt really comfortable with those two supporting it. And the look of it just feels so much like a traditional textbook that it just seemed like it would be a seamless integration for me and my students. There are not that many differences between the publisher version of the textbook and the OpenStax, other than the cost, mostly. There's a few things like maybe a publisher textbook might have slightly more up-to-date modern examples that they pull in, but I can supplement those little things. Chemistry, at least general chemistry, hasn't really changed much for the last, say, 75 years. And so I can supplement all of those little things. But the other nice thing about an OER is that we ourselves can edit them. We can keep them up to date to make sure that there's, no inaccuracies. And so it's all my fellow colleagues around the country and around the world that use this book that are keeping it up to date and keeping it current and relevant. So I think it's just as equivalent as a publisher textbook.
Yeah, there were a few students who, said they prefer a text version, but you can order a printed text version, and I think 5 students maybe did. It costs, I'm trying to remember how much it costs. I think it's in the $20 to $30 range somewhere. So I think honestly though, most of them were so happy to not buy a textbook that they didn't complain. I'm gonna ask them on like the midterm feedback evaluation about it, but so far they've been really positive, as you can imagine. Particularly, it's a gen ed. A lot of the students have, although hopefully I'll change this by the end of the semester, they have the view, a really kind of transactional view of this class when they need to get through it. And so they are happy to not have a textbook that they would probably return or, rent. I sort of agree with them in the sense that I don't think they're getting a worse experience, even though I did have to help a few of them at the beginning kind of figure out how some reading strategies for reading it online rather than by hand.
Yeah, they seem to like both, but my first year of using it, I didn't endorse the hard copy of the book as much as I do now. The first year I was like, hey, it's free online, use it online. And almost nobody bought the hard copy of the book, and I felt then they weren't using the book as much as they should. So after my first year, I strongly recommended that they still buy the hard copy of the book from our bookstore, but it is significantly cheaper than the publisher version of a book. I do think they like having the hard copy. I love having the digital copy that I can pull up in class really easily and just project on the screen, especially all the images that I cannot duplicate by drawing. I cannot draw. And so it's much easier for me to just pull up the digital book. It's also, I love having the digital table of contents and being able to quickly search through the book for, say, a key term really fast. I think that's an awesome feature for both the instructor and the students. So I really like the digital copy, but I do think that students prefer having the hard copy in their hands.
One thing that's been important this semester that I'm going to try to do even more coherently next time is talking to my students about why we're doing this. Because I think initially I was a little too nervous, so I was kind of overselling the free part, which is important. Like, I really care about costs for students. And now I've been trying to talk more about like the benefits of the particular OER source we're using. So particularly things like the way that it's current. So I need to do more of this myself, but it would be nice if we could get to the place somehow where students have some understanding of what an OER is. I don't know if it by that term. I think if you ask my students right now, they would probably say like, oh, we're using an e-text, but I don't know that they would be able to say why besides like, oh, it's free, which is fine. But if they had a few classes that were doing this, they would be able to think about that more.
So we've had the hard copy of the OpenStax chemistry available for the students in the bookstore, and some of them have preferred to get that physical copy. So I leave it up to them if they want to spend the $50 or so to get that printed copy. It's not a requirement because all the material is still online. At least with our level of students, because of their backgrounds, not all of them have had a laptop or a tablet to be able to get the digital version. But I think at least this year every student is just using the digital. I don't think I know of one student who's using the hard copy version.
Well, I will say this is you already know this, or people have already realized this. I was surprised at the difficulty students seem to have navigating the resource, which seemed to me to be like very intuitive. Like, it has a table of contents, you can page through, you can search for things. Each chapter has, the key terms and questions. And like, to me, it was easier than a book. But I had several students that I realized like a week or two in, when they came to my office, like, we're not able to do that. And so I really should have very patiently walked through, and I should have done it a few times. I think part of what happened was students dropped or added up until the second week or whatever, and then they were a little off. So I would encourage anyone doing an OER to not assume that digital nativity is going to do it for you, which is always a good rule to follow, and be really patient and walk students through how to use the resource and how you expect them to engage with it. So
the gaps that might be there are very minimal, and I just fill them in where I'm lecturing, and I might say, oh, this isn't covered in the textbook, but I think it's important, and so I just kind of put an extra star on say the board that I'm writing on to make sure the students are aware that, yeah, this is something they're not going to see in their book, but I think it's important, and it's usually really minimal.
Well, I sort of went through the chapters, and not all of them, but just went through a few chapters just to make sure that all the material that I typically covered was there. And the order was slightly different, but all of the information was there. So I just basically did a little check ahead of time to make sure that it would be appropriate for my students. And everything sort of matched up, so I felt comfortable starting with it.
Some of the chapters I was really surprised to find just how well put together they were, and how current they were. So one of the beautiful things about this textbook when you're teaching American government is it's accurate, and so it's got the Trump election and what's happened since in it, which is really fabulous because there's a really different way of thinking about a lot of questions if you're thinking about them before Trump. So that's been surprising. There's been a few chapters that haven't had everything I've wanted in them. And I think what they're particularly missing is kind of the political science disciplinary perspective. So I've added a few things in, some articles or extra resources. And then mainly, though, I've been making a lot of notes being like, this is what you should do next time. So I think I'm really trying to treating this like a trial run and trying to make notes of this is where I need something, rather than trying to retroactively put it all in, because the students are already dealing with the transition of figuring out what's this online textbook I'm having them read.
I think I still prefer having like the actual textbook, like the fact that OpenStax put everything together and they have it all curated by themselves, that's useful for me. But I think maybe in the future, if I felt comfortable enough and I had enough time, I'd really sort of mix and match and do my own thing and just keep it on the Canvas learning management system. But I'm not there. I don't have the time to get to that point yet.
Yeah, I haven't been brave enough to go in and actually edit the OER myself yet. The only things that I have done is if I found typos or mistakes, I have submitted those. And then I have gotten emails like within a week or two that they've been edited, which I really appreciate. I think that's kind of excellent that it can have that fast of a turnaround. Particularly in, say, the problems at the end of each chapter. If there's a typo or the answer doesn't seem right or something, you want to make sure that those are right for the students. And they've been very quick to make those changes, which I appreciate.
Yeah, I guess I'm on the fence about, so right now we're talking about the presidency, and ironically, I think it's the weakest chapter so far. And so I was thinking about kind of what makes it weak, but I think they're missing some theories about the way that different branches interrelate, but I think they're missing all the things that political scientists have said about how they fight with each other and how different types of power wax and wane and like what that looks like. So I've been thinking about like, should I say that? Is that helpful, or is that more just what I need to do in my class? I mean, I've been doing it in class, out loud. I do feel like they were very upfront with what they promised and delivered, so I'm not feeling upset. I think I like a little more political science in my American government, which makes sense. It may be that people are teaching it in high schools and they want more kind of social studies history approach.
I tend to pick my own supplementary materials. I mean, something common for science textbooks and science classes is sort of the online homework systems. And I mean, I think they've been around a lot longer than the OER textbooks, and I've never been a big fan of them. I've tried them out. I've talked with students who have used them in other classes, and I guess I'm a bit of a traditionalist because I like the students to sort of write out the problems. I like to have them do the math on paper, and if they do it using like a computer-generated tool, it's not going to translate in the same way to writing in an exam like in class. Like sometimes the students really get tied into how they've learned something. So if they learn how to do it on a computer, it's going to be frustrating for them to do it on paper later. I don't want to package it together because I don't really think that's the best thing for my students. So having the separate OpenStax textbook, I can have that as free, and then I can add in my supplementary material. So I've been using an iPad for 7 or 8 years now, and there's a lot of apps that I use that I can just bring up for free and show in class, and even have some of the students use them, without the cost, and they're getting other review materials that way. So I've never considered really packaging anything together, just because I don't think it's as worthwhile as other instructors believe they are.
I would like to have time to like build more of my own materials, and I've tried to put in some practice quizzes for students and stuff before, and some additional materials. Like I would love to finish. I have a start of this, but I've never finished it. It's a guide to basically like which episodes of various political TV shows you should watch for each topic. So like this is what you should watch in The West Wing and Veep and House of Cards if you really want to understand the filibuster, and here's what's wrong with what they're saying. That would be lovely. That's the content that I want.
I mean, right now I'm waiting for OpenStax to have an organic chemistry textbook. They don't yet. And so I cobbled together other OERs. So there's a website called LibreText that has some old textbooks attached to the website, and then they have supplemental modules where they have, and it's much more like sort of almost like Wikipedia, where they've had other instructors from across the country sort of create the course material that way. I would really prefer an actual online textbook, but there isn't a good one for organic, so I'm waiting for that to happen. And then my spouse and I are sort of writing labs for organic chemistry lab, putting that together, and she's already done that for general chemistry lab. So the lab part of the courses, they have their own textbook, but even there we're trying to go away from those and sort of write our own, so that we're printing it out for the students, or we're letting them use electronic report sheets that way, so they don't have to pay for those either.
Thank you for watching this Teach Tuesday video. And thanks again to Allison, Amy, and James for sharing their insights. We hope you've learned a bit about open educational resources. For more information on this or other Teach Tuesday topics, or to suggest a future topic, please feel free to reach out to the Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning.